First of all, how are my compatriots Christian and Zach doing today?
Oh, I'm crippled by the moral ambiguity of my violence.
I'm fine.
I figured Zach would be all right, just like Louis Strauss. Ugh. Okay. Zach is forever labeled an anti-communist now.
What?
Yep. Oppenheimer. Okay, I gotta get my breath for this. Okay. Epic biographical film. Written and directed by Christopher Deafening Grayscale Nolan. Probably only exists because Robert Pattinson gave him Oppenheimer speeches at the Tenet rap party, and based on the painstakingly yet appropriately long 2005 biography American Prometheus by Kai Bird and Martin J. Sherwin. The film follows J. Robert Oppenheimer's studies at Cambridge, professorship at Berkeley and California Institute of Technology, his fellow traveler experiences with the Communist Party members and causes in the 30s and early 40s, his crucial role in the Manhattan Project and his 1954 security hearing and its aftermath. Nolan, alum and Sigma male, Peaky Blinders, star Cillian Murphy as Oppenheimer. Robert Downey Jr., the guy from Iron Man, and Kirk Lazarus from Tropic Thunder, plays Louis Strauss, chair of the Atomic Energy Commission. A Quiet Place, part 512, and Mary Poppins Return star Emily Blunt as Kitty Oppenheimer. Commissioner Gordon, Sirius Black, Churchill, Fifth Element villain, as based President Truman. Cookie Pocket alum Josh Hartnett, his physicist Ernest Lawrence. Real Roderick from Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Huey from The Boys. Matt Damon from Outer Space's General Guy. Josh from Drake and Josh. Yelena Belova from Black Widow, also known as Florence Pugh, plays Sussy Kami Woman. Young Han Solo, Mr. Robert Freddie Mercury, the real Albert Einstein probably, and not Tom Conti. Just about every actor living ever. With all that being said, what did you think of the film?
Well, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. And I don't usually like Christopher Nolan very much. It's not that I think he's a bad filmmaker. He makes movies that, for the most part, I can't argue are bad in any way. He's a very skilled filmmaker. He knows how to make a film on a grand, exciting scale. He uses IMAX well, but a lot of the time I'm irritated by his really dull color palettes. I've said before that all Christopher Nolan movies just look like cement to me. And that's part of the reason I'm not very fond of his Dark Knight trilogy is I think he took like a very creative, strange universe and made it Chicago, and that kind of bugs me. And I also often am not a big fan of the sound mixing in his films and the non-linear narratives in his films. That being said, I was still excited to see this movie because I really like Cillian Murphy, and I also find Oppenheimer a really historically fascinating figure who I was interested in learning more about. Not to say that this film is a documentary, but I sort of trusted Christopher Nolan, history buff that he is, to kind of stick close to the history. And everything that I have disliked about previous Christopher Nolan films really worked for me in this one, in a way that not only made this film great, but also made me maybe appreciate a little bit more his previous films, because this one kind of made me see, oh, that's what he's been trying to do this whole time. And it kind of put them in a different light. So I gave this a full 5 out of 5. I can't really think of anything that I would say is wrong with this movie or needs to be changed about this movie. I don't think anybody's poorly cast, even though there's a million people in this movie. If this movie had come out in the 70s, I guarantee its poster would have had like a bunch of little photos of the cast at the bottom. It would have been one of those like epic Hollywood films. Look at all the stars we got in our movie. And they kind of did that in the trailers with the names, but it's a little more subdued nowadays in the marketing. But yeah, despite its length, despite its huge cast and the amount of stuff it's covering, it never once feels scattered or overstuffed to me, and I don't think I ever really lost track of a narrative either, which I know is something people were saying was a concern with the black and white and the color and the jumping timelines. But no, it worked very well for me. I enjoyed it a lot. I wish I could have seen it in IMAX, but the only screening I could get into was a standard cinema. But it was still one of the bigger screens in our local AMC. So I enjoyed it. 5 out of 5. Two thumbs way up from Zach
Siskel,
and
Ebert, and
Garrigus.
Zach. Yeah.
Wow.
Nice.
Some rare high praise. I can't remember the last time you said the phrase 2 thumbs up.
I think that's the first time.
But, I'll take it. Yeah, I also give this a 5 out of 5, just to get that out of the way. And I've seen this twice, though, alas, I did not drive out to King of Prussia, Pennsylvania to see it in the proper IMAX 70 millimeter print. I don't even know exactly how the format, the aspect ratio differs between digital IMAX and the proper printed IMAX. But the first time I saw this, I saw it in IMAX with laser on a bonkers screen in Michigan with a friend, because I was in Ohio and I drove up to see a friend to see this. And it was, I mean, the screen was so big, it was overwhelming. Oh my God. And I saw this a second time, maybe like a week and a half or so later with different friends in 70 millimeter, but not IMAX. So I've gotten like two halves of the IMAX 70 millimeter
Put it together.
and not put them together. But and also that second time we were like 15-ish minutes late, so we missed that whole like epic intro with Kenneth Branagh and the like we came in during like the whole like throwing glasses into the corner thing. Which was a bit of a bummer. But yeah, I'll just echo everything Zach said. I thought this was spectacular, and I've had similar feelings about Christopher Nolan. I've always really liked the Dark Knight trilogy, and funnily enough, I think one of the biggest disagreements between the three of us is I think Christian Bale is like amazing, like among the best of the Batmen, and you guys are just kind of like, yeah, he's fine at best. So, but I have been Nolan's never someone that I would say that I would list as like one of my favorite directors. I'd probably say like 8 to 10 people before even thinking of him, and I don't actively seek out his movies, but before seeing Oppenheimer, I just kind of glanced at his resume, so to speak, and what I had rated his past films. And I realized, and I texted this to you guys at the time, I think, I realized I had never rated any of his films lower than 4 stars, even though I didn't think of him in that way. And I agree that this, like the way he approaches the nonlinear storytelling in Oppenheimer doesn't feel gimmicky at all. And in other films where I'm sometimes like, wait, did we jump back again? Did we jump forward? When is this? I'm either somehow acutely aware of when a scene is taking place, or it doesn't totally matter exactly where the perfect chronology is, because it organically makes so much sense, however he chose to cut it up. And the performances here are just like unbelievably perfect. And I'm sure we'll talk about Cillian Murphy at length, but I also think Robert Downey Jr. is unbelievable as Louis Strauss. Having seen him as Iron Man in a billion things and whatever, he's got this sort of natural quippiness to him, where it almost feels like, and if you see him doing press for any of the Marvel movies, you do get the sense that he is Iron Man, and you know he was born to play the role thing or whatever. But I think in this role he's doing a lot more work as an actor, and I think he's alluded to this in some of his interviews and the press he's done for Oppenheimer. But he's really sinking his teeth into the material Nolan gives him, and I'm almost tempted to say that he's even better than Cillian. Not that comparison matters, but they're both incredible, and I would be surprised if they both didn't win the Academy Award. This has really stuck in my head since seeing it. I hope to see it again if I can catch it before it leaves theaters. And yeah, not much more to say beyond how blown away I was, literally and figuratively.
I was going to include, I was like, what is it? What is the terminology people use? I was going to say you have to describe the film without saying blown away. That's what I was thinking I was going to put. I didn't do it. Christian used it.
I've already failed.
Damn it. Okay.
Darn.
Mitchell gets World War II win. Global
I'm just going to
success.
take a little nap. You guys can wake me up when Mitchell's done.
I will try to keep it short. So I'm the only Nolan fan on earth that really liked Inception, really liked Dunkirk, and really liked Tenet, has never seen
Even Tenet,
Interstellar,
wow.
and wasn't a huge fan of the Dark Knight trilogy. So I'm like the only.
That is
Find another
fascinating.
person that's the same as that, right?
Yeah, that is a weird plot.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yes, I think everyone who's seen at least 2, probably 3 Nolan films, to be sure, knows what his style is, right? And knowing, like, I was very hyped from the trailer because I was finally glad that a World War II movie was getting a massive budget again, and was getting it from not like a complete like Hollywood simp director that actually had some originality. So I was very happy with that choice in general. But I was also, there's always going to be like a lingering hesitancy. And also I didn't know much about Oppenheimer, honestly. It's kind of difficult when you're scouring through multiple incidents through history, particularly during World War II, that you won't really get like individual biopics that show up very much. And if you do, it's often about the generals, or it's about the presidents, or about very high-ranking members of cabinets and things like that, and of other countries also, not just the U.S. So when you kind of hear about this random guy, a scientist, it's like you learn about scientists in like science classes and in chemistry and physics, and everything kind of, once you're in that, like at least in the very beginning stages of those science classes, you kind of stop right around when quantum physics starts, probably because of how complicated it can get theoretically. So yeah, full disclosure, I read American Prometheus leading up to this, and it's technically 1,000 pages, but it's really
Bravo,
thank
sir.
you. It's
Bravo.
900 pages, and it was worth. I listened to it driving to Chicago, and I watched the film while I was at Chicago, and I was listening to pretty much the rest of it, and then read the rest of it back at home. So it's a very long read, and it was very worth it. I know I've read everything between his parents to his death, and definitely great supplementary material, because I was with my girlfriend, and I was like pointing at the screen. I'm like, this is gonna be important later. This is like somebody who read every single MCU comic. I'm like pointing out like the apple, the Hulk Chevalier. Oh my god. It's crazy when Albert Einstein becomes like the least important character in your film. Okay, but yeah, that was a fantastic experience. But I will say that it's extremely well shot, extremely well researched. Probably, I wouldn't like definitively say the most historically accurate World War II adjacent film I've ever seen, but it's kind of hard to say just because it's a biopic and it's analyzing all these different events. But it's definitely like, you really can't get any more research than how it was. And there's plenty of discrepancies, and there's things that are even mentioned in the book that Nolan purposely does not include, which for the most part I entirely agree with his decisions on that front. But overall, like, the perception that he was trying to give for Oppenheimer, and focusing on this critical period of his life, and also the critical period of the United States transitioning into the McCarthy era, is just fantastic. It's like it's tons of lessons that resonate now and will continue to resonate probably for the rest of human history. And I think that's not an understatement. I think that's a pretty accurate, like, level-headed statement. And yeah, I mean, perfect casting. Like, I wasn't overly deafened this time. I could hear what the characters were saying, but we'll get into that. So obviously, I gave it a 5 out of 5. So I first want to talk about actually having Nolan being chosen as a director. And I was trying to find a good quote from one of the authors, and somehow I just happened to stumble upon the most reliable source ever, Wikipedia. And one of the two authors, Bird, said that Nolan covers in a very deft way the argument among the physicists over whether the bomb was necessary or not, and has Oppenheimer after Hiroshima saying the bomb is used as a virtually already defeated enemy. People who know nothing about Oppenheimer will go thinking they're going to see a movie about the father of the atomic bomb. Instead, they're going to see this mysterious figure and a deeply mysterious biographical story. So how do you think the film functions as a biopic? I think the last biopic we watched was for Johnny Cash. Walk
the Line?
Yeah, with Joaquin Phoenix. So I think that was the last one all three of us watched together. So I was just, for some reason I was just thinking about that. And yeah, what do you guys think about this film as a biopic?
Well, I definitely liked this more than Walk the Line. I was not a big fan of Walk the Line. Fair. But yeah, I mean, I think this does a really good job of spelling out Oppenheimer as a person. As for the author's claim that people would go to see this expecting to see a movie about the father of the atomic bomb, when I hear that, at least, it implies to me that the author feels that people think of Oppenheimer as I don't know, like a proud mad scientist behind this creation, which I don't know if I entirely agree with, because I think right next to, if people know Oppenheimer, they know I Am Become Death, the Destroyer of Worlds, which certainly isn't the most charitable reading on his own work. But I feel like they do a great job of looking into his character beyond just that statement, and beyond even just his direct relationship with the bomb and with the Manhattan Project. Like, I knew nothing about his, accusations of communism and relationship with the Communist Party, and I wasn't especially surprised to hear about any of that, because communism was a hot button issue at the time, and amongst intellectuals, it was certainly a topic of discussion, even if people weren't part of the party. So that totally clicks that it'd be part of his story, but I didn't know that at all. And I think the movie did a good job of kind of leading you through every aspect of that, instead of just dropping you in the middle of it and you feeling like, wait, what about the Communist Party? Who's a communist? It very clearly tracked everything through. Which, again, I was worried was not going to be the case with this, because I'm used to, I think one of my least favorite videos of Christopher Nolan is the one that people share so often, which is he has a chalkboard and he looks like a snooty college professor, and he's explaining the narrative flow of Memento. Like, yeah, no, I'm not a fan of that. I'm not a fan of his, like, you don't get it, but with a little discussion, maybe you will. And I didn't feel that way about this movie at all. Like, despite it being non-linear, every aspect of his life, that was discussed, at least, I feel like I understood and was able to follow throughout, which was a worry for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, every inclusion feels very intentional, and I don't know if this is a function of the non-linear things or just letting a story play out, even in the more traditional sense. But like, something that I didn't totally understand on the first watch or appreciate, I felt like my first viewing of the film, I was maybe like 60 to 70% of the way through it, and I was kind of like, I feel like every actor is killing it right now, except Emily Blunt. I'm not really sure what she's trying to do here, and it was equal parts the way that she reacts to Oppenheimer mourning Florence Pugh's character, and then when she kind of turns the momentum on the, like, closed door kangaroo court trial thing that's happening to Oppenheimer. I think her character and her, like, the intention behind the way she interacts with Oppenheimer is something that requires attention and, like, a complete viewing to understand and appreciate, because the second time around I was just like, wow, she's perfect, and I had no questions whatsoever. And I like Memento, by the way. Memento is an excellent film, and you guys should both watch it if you haven't already. But that might have been my favorite Nolan film coming into this. I'm not sure. As far as biopics go, I didn't know much about Oppenheimer coming into this. I just knew the basics. He built the bomb or whatever, and I knew that I Am Become Death and all this and that. But that was it. I didn't even really realize that, like, Einstein would even be in the picture in this time period, because I wasn't thinking about it. But yeah, I think it functions fine, and I'll say what I've said before. I don't know if we've even discussed a biopic since, like, Sergio in season 1.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of that too.
I feel like in terms of historical accuracy, my general rule of thumb is I don't care if movie good, and I don't care because movie good.
Yeah. Well, I will present an interesting observation that I had reading the book. I would say it's probably, I guess, if you had to fault Nolan for anything, it would be the lack of modesty and his perception of how Oppenheimer's life played out. And obviously there's a sense of modesty when it comes to anybody's life, and that when you're trying to make something like a film, it's very difficult to basically, at some point you have to decide, what am I summarizing, what am I paraphrasing, because you have to eventually make a point that's digestible and that the general public will appreciate, and without fully like deceiving them or declaring propaganda. So this was the best that Nolan could have done under the circumstances when it comes to portraying the complexities of his life. And I guess I'll lead into what my statement was going to be, was that Oppenheimer was more complicated than someone who was guilty of the bomb. He wasn't somebody that was necessarily supportive of the national initiative to create the hydrogen bomb, but he also was a very profound patriot. He never was reluctant about like his patriotism, and it was something that Einstein and a lot of like very left-leaning and prominent scientists of that time period, and especially in the McCarthy era, were being. He was not an outspoken, by the late 50s, he was not an outspoken critic of like national initiatives against like communism, and he wasn't also like vocal about the Vietnam War or anything. He kind of became just reluctant and cynical and not wanting to be participating in any of that. And he once saw a play, or had one of his former students had seen a play and written to him about a German play that was specifically about the security hearing, because a lot of very liberal and anti-communist circles in Europe were huge fans of Oppenheimer still. So one of the biggest things was that one of the lines in the play was that he was doing the devil's work. He like says, I realized that I was doing the devil's work, that the character playing Oppenheimer. And Oppenheimer was extremely mad about that, because he was saying that it shouldn't be summarized into something that is that I'm all guilt-ridden about it, and that I've been living my life in guilt, and that I feel so sorry for everything that happened. All he wanted to be was a sympathetic character that was both sympathetic for the country and sympathetic towards forwarding the progression of science, while having a limited regulation on how nuclear bombs were going to be developed. And he only had a brief time after the war where he was really like into the committees, and he was the chairman of the General Advisory Board for the AEC, the Atomic Energy Commission, and that was kind of what got him in trouble with Lewis Strauss to begin with. So knowing all that, it's like, well, might as well just show the rest of his life. He goes to St. John's for many years. Kitty hits somebody with a bottle. It's a whole nother thing. Okay, Kitty goes crazy. She's an alcoholic, right? But
okay.
It's a whole nother story when they go to the Virgin Islands at St. John's. And that's a whole nother 10 years, right? So,
well, that's for Oppenheimer 2.
Exactly, right.
Oppenheimer 2, Virgin Islands.
Yes, the Virgin Islands excursion. That's when Emily Blunt will get her moment, Christian.
Yes.
But,
good.
Written and directed by Emily Blunt.
Yes. And the poison apple thing is something that happens, even though Niels Bohr does not like walk in. What happens is that Beckett actually does eat it, and then because Oppenheimer's dad has like he knows a lot of lawyers and stuff. The Ethical Culture Society was like a very liberal Jewish community, so they knew a lot of like very high like what am I thinking? Like very well-known businessmen and lawyers and things. So they were able to actually get him like quote unquote exonerated and not expelled from Harvard, which is what happened.
Wow.
Or I should say from Cambridge. Sorry, that was at Cambridge. But yes, so I think that Nolan did a fantastic job. I was very skeptical when he said that he like heavily researched like what Oppenheimer did and who he was. And I think that there's literally points in the book where there's quotes from FBI wiretaps and letters that are actually directly translated into the actual script of the movie, which is fantastic.
Wow.
A lot of the key lines, I think one that was delivered really well by Teller, having his like final testimony for Oppenheimer, was literally exactly what Teller actually said, and a lot of the questioning, the line of questioning was very like exactly the same. Teller shaking his hand after saying I'm sorry. There's a lot of quotes that are directly taken from real life files that were released under the Freedom of Information Act. So that in and of itself, it's a wealth of information, very hard to get wrong, but it could be it's also very easy to like misstep in pacing, and I feel like the pacing was one of the best things. Having the black and white being more like an objective, showing the objective version of everything, and then having the subjective coloring, which is, I believe, is something that Nolan said himself was the intent behind that. So we can go into the cinematography, I guess. So it was filmed in a combination of IMAX 65mm and 65mm large format film, including sections in IMAX black and white film, which is kind of a big marketing point for this film. And then because of the size of the film and the speed it was pulled to the camera, it's impossible to record on-set sound. So most dialogue scenes are shot on the 5-perf 70mm format rather than full-frame IMAX. Van Hoytema, I think is how you pronounce his name, Nolan alum, was behind the camera. So knowing this extremely important technical information, how did you think the cinematography stood out? Did you think IMAX worth it? IMAX, big screen, big boom.
Well, I think a lot of the advertising and a lot of the hubbub around the film was, you have to see this in IMAX for the bomb. I kind of disagree, though. I don't really think that, because the Trinity test is honestly a pretty minor part of the movie. I mean, it's an important part of the movie, but in terms of the length of the movie, the Trinity test is like a thimble in the ocean of the entire film. And for the amount of rigmarole that Nolan spouted in press junkets about, like, the explosion, the authentic explosion. When I actually saw it, I kind of thought, oh, is that it? And it was still like an impactful moment.
Yeah.
But they had built the explosion up to be something that I don't think it ever could have ended up being once you actually saw the film. But I still wish I had seen this in IMAX for the faces and the character moments. I do think that, I mean, this is a movie that plays out almost entirely in, like, or the really important bits of the movie, at least, play out almost entirely in close-up and medium close-ups of actors. And so there's so many subtle facial things that they get to do that, I would have loved to see that in a larger format screening. The same way that if I had the chance, I would probably love to see, like, 12 Angry Men in an IMAX screening, which this film did kind of remind me of in a few places. Yeah, I mean, I can't speak too much to IMAX because I didn't actually see it in IMAX, but in terms of actual cinematography, I thought it was fine. I think you guys and our audience at this point know that, personally, when it comes to cinematography, I really love a style that leans into being more showy and more stylized artistically, which is not what Christopher Nolan goes for. And I think it's good that he doesn't go for that here, because I don't think that would suit the content. But as is, I do think that the way it's filmed and the way it's lit is very kind of naturalistic, and this is the desert. We shall allow our actors to make the movie now. Hoyt van Hoytema is a great cinematographer. I think that he got a chance to do some flashier stuff in Nope, for instance, which is much more of a stylized cinematographer's movie. But here, I think he's just crafting solid images for the script and the actors to work within.
That makes sense to me. I was watching some Nolan interview somewhere, and he was asked if he storyboards, and he said something like, usually no, or not most of the time, which was interesting to me, and probably is reflected in the sort of more performer-led visuals in most of the spots here. I would say, yeah, it's worth seeing in IMAX if you can. It's not like an absolute deal breaker. I definitely didn't miss it as much as I thought I would the second time. And I find sometimes aspect ratio changes annoy me. It's like, just like pick a rectangle. Like, come on. But when I saw it in IMAX, I was seeing it on such a huge screen that it was kind of hard to follow when the aspect ratio changed. And I mean, it was literally just like, oh my gosh, it was so big, so big, guys. But, in 70 millimeter, non-IMAX 70 millimeter, where it's all widescreen, I wasn't bothered by not having the IMAX shots, if that makes sense. So I think it's worth seeking out if you can, just because, blah blah. It's as the artist intended you to see it. Blah blah blah. Whatever. I guess that matters sometimes. Whatever. But and in defense of the Trinity test, I think it's less a reflection of that scene's limitations than it is a reflection of the outstanding character work and acting. That is kind of like a thimble.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Not the main
I do
point
not
of the
mean to
film.
poo-poo the Trinity test. I think that's still a great scene. But the actual, I think when the way they marketed the movie, people thought the whole thing was going to be like, oh, itchy fingers on the button, the bomb's about to go off. And so much more of it is like court hearings and people talking to each other.
Yeah, it's almost similar to how Barbie was like, this film will break the boundaries in every way, and then it's like jokes that were approved by Mattel. But whatever, we already talked about that. And I think it's also just a reflection that Nolan knows how to make this. He made the right decisions about where to hang the drama. He didn't try to take a stance on whether Oppenheimer felt intensely guilty about the bomb. Like somehow in the final act, it's never really explicitly revealed to us whether he would, quote unquote, regret building the hydrogen bomb. But at the same time, that never really limits the drama at play. And I think similarly, the fact that the Trinity test, I feel like the fallout of that, jeez, the scenes that follow, where people are celebrating and some of the scientists are stunned, and then after they use the bombs, when Oppenheimer gives a speech, that is not felt by him at all, at least as played by Killian. I think it's a real testament to how strong the character work is, that those moments matter more than the sort of like historical footnotes that precede them that would be considered, or at least viewed as the probable climax if you were reading this from a textbook or maybe from the biography. I can't say to that, but yeah.
So like my biggest criticism of the book is that the authors assumed that if a character was mentioned, we had to hear their entire backstory and that we had to know everything about their past. Like I didn't need to know what their neighbor singing opera songs at night at St. John's in the Virgin Islands like impacted Kitty Oppenheimer's ability to drink alcohol. Like I don't know why that had anything to do with Robert Oppenheimer's life. But nonetheless, I like reading supplementary material and I like having a full scope of everything, so it worked for me probably better than most. But I will say I have to say that I think the Trinity test was impactful to me knowing going in that it wasn't CGI, I think. I think seeing something that massive and that like significant, like in general, is like pretty astounding to see. Like and as like a blockbuster movie is like a movie that everyone's going out to see, even if it's just because Barbie's coming out. Also, I think that seeing practical effects on such like on the forefront is like a monumental historical achievement for filmmaking, I think. And I also think that it will probably encourage more directors to take that route should Universal call them up and tell them, here's your money, here's your hundreds of millions, please make biopic. So I think I agree. I think I was definitely surprised. Like I thought it was going to be bigger, right? And then pretty much what Christian said about like a lot of the drama really did hinge on the psyche of Oppenheimer and how much he was suffering over the circumstances that he was going through. And I think at least the book pretty much like puts the 1954 hearing as like the biggest, most monumental like damage ever done to Oppenheimer's like brain. It's like it really kind of overshadowed in a lot of ways the issues that a lot of him as well as all of the scientists really involved in making the bomb was following Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So I Yeah, I think it's interesting that he never really cared for like historical significance, and he kind of cared more about being modest and stoic and taking things by stride, and that's kind of the feel that you get throughout the whole film as a viewer. I feel like you're kind of just taking things in stride with him and like seeing how things are just happening to him as he's being involved in whatever he feels like being involved in. And I think that's pretty awesome. I think that it's cool. It's cool and also very saddening and depressing, because seeing such a massive contrast between someone who clearly cares so much about their country and is just trying to do the right thing in the moment, and also just has a massive he has not only has a massive ego that gets severely dampened over time throughout his life. And they don't really go too much into the ego part, but he had a very massive, clever ego, and he's talking to like the biggest minds ever, like Niels Bohr and Heisenberg and freaking Pauli. The Pauli exclusion principle, we all heard about that before. And I think that it's crazy to see all of the interactions that he has with like the communists and the like the communist adjacent like clubs and stuff, and like the professors complaining about how the government's being annoying and like we're getting involved in something we shouldn't, and then all of a sudden he's like the biggest progenitor of like military defense in the world probably. And that's like, it's that irony I feel like that you feel the full impact of, especially going into the security hearing. So I guess we can go into the cast. I mean, obviously you can't go through everybody, but we'll just mention like our biggest comments on the cast in general. Cillian Murphy, obviously, being one of them.
I'm trying to think of like a highlight, smaller character. David Krumholtz. He's great. Bernard from Elf is great in this. As I saw someone on Twitter call it the best Wayne Knight character that Wayne Knight never played, which I can kind of track that. Which I think everybody now remembers Wayne Knight as Newman from Seinfeld, but there was a time where he was a very successful dramatic actor. And if they'd made Oppenheimer in the 90s, you can bet he would have been in it. But yeah, I think, I mean, everybody's great in this movie. I don't think there's anybody that I would say wasn't like good or dragged down any of their scenes or anything like that. I wasn't as a lot of people hyped up the single Casey Affleck scene, and I don't think I was as blown away by that scene as a lot of other people were. But it's still, I mean, it works. He's good in it. If there's one character who kind of feels like an outlier and maybe their style of performance doesn't mesh with everybody else's, I would say Matt Damon. But that's fine because he's meant to be the singular, like, holy military mind in this group of scientific bigwigs. So he's kind of meant to stand out and not necessarily feel totally comfortable next to all of these other guys. Also, not entirely related to performance, but there's a Paul Newman film called Fat Man and Little Boy, where I think he plays that character. I think he plays that general. And I'm intrigued to check that out because I think that I'd be intrigued to see that kind of alternate perspective in a different film. But yeah, I mean, everybody's great. Was Michael Shannon in this movie?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I think I would
For some
remember.
reason, I remembered Michael Shannon being one of like the guys from the government who comes to talk to Oppenheimer when he's working on the I think it's like a particle accelerator, or he's using it. But I might also be remembering a scene from Amsterdam, which has a similarly huge cast. So, but yeah, I mean, it's not an especially elaborate response, but everybody's great. Even Roderick, even Josh Peck.
Oh my God.
Drake, where's the hydrogen bomb?
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
I'm glad that I didn't have this like familiarity with Roderick and I knew Drake and Josh, but I didn't like like entrenched in it, so that I didn't find it Elijah Wood distracting, because I totally would have if I were.
That's a deep cut.
Gosh, where to begin?
Das Malkian. Come on, Christian.
Oh yeah,
Oh, right, yeah.
oh my God, get out of town. Oh my gosh, he's just like murder in that dude's eyes. Holy cow. Oh, I really like him as a performer. Gosh, I don't know if you guys have seen the newest Suicide Squad film, but he's great in that. And he's like the bright spot in the first two Ant-Man films too. Gosh. Yeah, I hope he keeps doing stuff. What a cool guy. The Casey Affleck scene totally flew over my head and was basically unnoticed by me in my first viewing, but in the second viewing, it like smacked me in the face and totally lived up to the hype, at least for me. So that was like so chilling. I've already talked about RDJ a little bit in my opening preamble thing, but he's perfect. Yeah, gosh. Oh, I want to shout out Alden Ehrenreich, our young Han Solo, who's had an unlucky trajectory in Hollywood of being great in Hail Caesar and being like, oh, who's that guy? He was really good. And then being cast as young Han Solo, and then everyone
hated
Harrison Ford. And then, he's not Harrison Ford, therefore he sucks. The next movie that anyone saw was Cocaine Bear, which is just like, no. And then he's in freaking Oppenheimer.
Yes.
Like, what the heck? But he's great. I love everything he's doing with Downey. I feel like he doesn't miss a beat with him. And I love the way I feel like this season a lot I've talked about facial transitions and like nonverbal communication in actors and the way that they perform. And that pivotal scene when Alden, as the aide to the senator, is kind of enjoying the fact that Strauss failed. And right before he opens the door and says, oh, well, maybe they were talking about something more important, like the most epic roast ever. He opens the door, and then they both put on this like perfectly polished like political smile for each other, and then they face the press. Like, gosh, what a golden moment by two splendid actors. I really hope he gets more work.
Yeah, special shout out to my man's JFK saving the day.
Who isn't in the movie, but...
he's in the movie, Zach. He ends Strauss's career.
Yeah, but he's just off screen, isn't he? We wouldn't actually see him.
No, we don't see him, Zach, but he's important. Promise.
But he's in the movie
in
Zach.
Spirit. He's in the script, so he's in the movie. That's how it works. Okay, all right. I'll give a minor fun fact just because it was interesting. JFK was like, I will not vote against the president. Why would I ever do that? I'll have to see something very substantial. And then one of the other senators that was voting against Eisenhower's selection of Strauss to be the Commerce Secretary. He was like, by the way, look at this really bad and stupid security hearing for Oppenheimer and all the bad things he did during that time, because the FBI and Hoover also obviously have all that stuff too. So they were like, look at all this FBI stuff. And then he was like, okay, I will vote against him. And then that's what happened. That's how Strauss, literally it was JFK that did that. So, but anyway, I think this is based on what I've seen, and I've seen a lot of I've seen a lot of scenes of Robert Downey Jr. and a lot of his earlier works. I haven't seen like the full film, so I can't say definitively. I will say that this is definitely the best I have ever seen of him. I think this is something that he finally deserved, and seeing all the interviews of him talk about Oppenheimer is substantially different. I think it's finally putting to light the fact that just because he finally showed a little bit of emotion and frustration as Iron Man, as Tony Stark, is like everyone in the MCU is like, wow, that's acting now. Like, he went from being Playboy millionaire to now he's like frustrated and he's dying for the Avengers. Spoiler alert.
Slightly upset billionaire.
Yeah, slightly upset, right. I will say, from a historical perspective, that Strauss was a lot more motivated by politics than he was by like personal angst, but like regardless, I think it was played very well, and I think the big reveal, the way that was played out as like a montage of showing that he actually set up everything, is very not only accurate, but I thought that was extremely effective in showing how easily he could take advantage of the era and just completely dominate anyone that was remotely communist. And as the authors of the book say multiple times, like Oppenheimer was considered like the biggest victim of the McCarthy era. Just because of that, because of his substantial contributions and everything. But yeah, I think there's literally not a single cast member I think that really did poorly. I will say that for Kitty, knowing a little bit about the actual person in real life and then going into it and seeing how effectively Blunt was able to like portray a lot of her important character moments, like talking about when they're at Los Alamos and on horseback, and she was talking about her past lovers and stuff. I thought that was important and significant. I thought her having a testimony, and because she was one of the most like damaging testimonies, I guess, to the committee's integrity at the security hearing. And I thought that her being so critical and overbearing of Oppenheimer was very accurate to her character in real life, and I thought she portrayed that very well, being frustrated. And I did see some reviews that obviously they didn't read the book, but they were thinking that perhaps Kitty was set up to be kind of like a feminist icon, or like somebody who's supposed to be like a stronger woman than what she was supposed to be at the time. But it wasn't that kind of relationship, simply because Robert wasn't that type of person to begin with. He was a very liberal, open person. They were both aware that he had multiple affairs, and like mentioning Florence Pugh's, I guess a good segue into her performance, half of which was probably her being nude, but otherwise, I think that she did it.
We'll talk about that too, I guess.
But. Sure, yeah. But once again, accurate to the book. A lot of her lines were directly from the book and directly from real life, which I thought was awesome. Obviously, the scene with the Bhagavad Gita or whatever the hell it's called. Is that was kind of like a creative decision on behalf of Nolan, but to have that line right out then. But I think. And the Chevalier affair stuff, once again, I was like pointing, like nobody in the theater knows what this is, but I know the Chevalier affair is like one of the main things that kind of brought everything down. Just like brief moments, like Chris Stuckman said, like characters that are normally like have possibly multiple awards, like multiple lead roles in massive budget movies that everyone's seen, are like in scenes for like 2 seconds and are like blurred out. What did you guys think of Cillian Murphy? Because the last like thing I thought that was underrated that he was in was Anthropoid, which is another World War II movie, believe it or not.
Oh yes, okay, yes,
yeah,
okay.
About Reinhard Heydrich's assassination in Czechoslovakia. But I thought, like, he was in Dunkirk. Obviously, he's been in a lot of Nolan films. Scarecrow. So how do you think like he did portraying this complex character?
I think he was great. I have always kind of been on the side of Cillian Murphy, especially when he was like first coming up in Danny Boyle films. He was a really unique actor, I think, because he had this like scrawny intellectualism around him, but he also proved like himself capable of like real ferocity, and he's got something behind those features and behind those eyes that can be kind of scary, and you see that as the Scarecrow. But the place where that kind of clicked for me was in 28 Days Later. He spends the first 2/3 of that movie as this I mean, I'm not going to call it would be mean to call the character a loser, because he has woken up from a coma in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, so I can't necessarily throw too much dirt on his name. But he spends the whole first 2/3 of that movie being pushed around and not knowing what's happening and like running away and basically being beaten down. And then in the last third, something just like snaps and he goes berserk in the most literal meaning of the word. And you really get to see those two different sides of the kinds of performances he's capable of. But this, I think, I mean, this he's bringing that same kind of talent to the table, but it's so much more nuanced than I think anything I've seen him in before. I think maybe you could compare the kind of performance he's giving to Thomas Shelby in Peaky Blinders, but I think Peaky Blinders is not nearly as intelligent or subtle as this movie is. And I liked Peaky Blinders, but Peaky Blinders is also kind of a very, occasionally, it's a very dumb, brutish show where cool things happen to electric guitar stings. And this movie you get the same kind of effect that you get from his performance there, but just from singular lines, a single flick of a cigarette but him looking off to the corner of a room. You get the same kind of devastating impression that you get in a show like that when he cuts somebody's eye out with a razor blade or something. Like, you don't need that for this movie. Not only for the content, but also he doesn't need that to be impressive in his performance. And I think there's a lot of great directorial touches here that lend to that as well. I think maybe one of my favorite moments of performance from him, but also one of my favorite moments in the film, is during the hearing. There's a tracking shot where they go across the table to the left, and we see Oppenheimer on this side while he's being questioned, and then we go back across to the right, and as we pass over, I forget the lead prosecutor's name, but as we kind of go behind him, Oppenheimer transitions from being clothed to naked, and we have that visual representation of how he feels that all of his life is being kind of lain upon the slab here, and there's nothing left for him to hide. And that's not even a moment where Cillian Murphy has any lines other than maybe like, yes, I did, yes, that's true. But in that moment, it's just gutturally shocking. And I think it's one of the first scenes, at least for me, where you really see Oppenheimer rattled. Because up until that point, he's been a pretty cocky young man, pretty cocky old man in the times that we've seen him, and it feels like he can take on the world. And then at that moment, we kind of see all of his defenses stripped back until that attitude that protected him earlier is gone, and he has no armor left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've always really liked him as well, though I haven't seen a ton of his films beyond most of what he's done with Nolan. I actually still haven't seen Inception, if you can believe that. But I saw A Quiet Place Part 2 in theaters. It was like the first movie I think I saw in theaters with my parents after COVID had started. And we still weren't totally out of COVID at that point, if I remember correctly. But that's kind of funny looking. That's like probably him and Emily Blunt's like first like collaboration was that, which is strange in retrospect. But he's always got this very imposing countenance, and it's hard to know where his acting, like the acting side of his performance, starts and his physical features end, because especially with Oppenheimer, they feel a lot like one and the same because of this imposing stare, and everybody's mentioned how blue his eyes are and this and that. But and I really do think he does a great job of portraying the timeline in a literal sense, in the early stages of Oppenheimer in college to the very end, when we're seeing the sort of flash forward to him being given this presidential award and giving obligatory handshakes to Teller and others. And this narration from Einstein about how this time will weigh on him and how these congratulations aren't for him in a perverse way. And yeah, he's just superb. I don't really know if I have the vocabulary or the ability to recognize all that goes into his performance. But and in plenty of interviews, Downey and others have said how much he was on the call sheet and how all consuming this role has been for him. So yeah, it's certainly commendable. I hope he came out of the other side all right. But, yeah, it's one for the ages for sure.
Yeah, it pretty much summarizes it right there. It's pretty good. Yeah, I think the whole cockiness, especially when he's in the hearing after Strauss appoints him to Princeton as the board of directors, director of the board of directors. I don't know what it's called. The board of something at Princeton.
Right.
And
right.
and he's like saying exporting the isotopes is like something like being concerned about isotopes is like caring about a sandwich or something. Even though in real life he said like vitamins or something ridiculous. And then Strauss is just like staring there, and it's funny because the book actually like describes there's like a lot of people staring at Strauss, and he's just like looking seething with rage the whole time. It's just really awesome to see. Like, I'm basically reading where like every aspect of the movie came from, and all the subtlety is all there. A lot of the original moments that are in the book that are directly from real life are literally in the film, and I think it's like a fantastic way of portraying Oppenheimer's life, and also having Cillian Murphy having those moments where he's flashing first to like the fact that he's killed a bunch of people, and then a lot of the flashing and craziness when he's naked, when Roger Robb is interrogating him. Jason Clarke, shout out. Last time I saw him was Terminator Genesis. So I am so glad that he got his just he's right part for him, because that was a fantastic kangaroo court, and I think you can just see the despair, and they did a great job aging him when he receives the Fermi Award and everything, and I just, yeah, I mean, it's just, you get a full sense of everything that he's thinking and everything he's feeling, and leaving the facial expressions up to interpretation more, and having less of the film explained to you, especially because it would be so tempting as a historical drama to like want to explain what's going on more. I think just having a sense of one person's life is a very human thing that can be very easily translated in this medium, and I think like there's really nothing else that can be said about how awesome Nolan did. So I guess I'll say one minor thing so we don't run too much over time, but the sound design was one of the biggest criticisms. Obviously, a lot of people can't hear freaking what people are saying in Nolan films. I didn't have a problem listening to really crappy TV speakers for Tenet, but maybe that's just because of the high pitch or whatever. And I think, what did you guys, like, did you guys hear what was going on? Like, was anything too loud? Both from a regular theater and an IMAX theater experience, I guess.
I didn't have any problems on my end for either respective experience. I don't know if the sound, I really don't know what goes into 70 millimeter from a sound perspective, but I don't know how that differs from digital. But no, and I haven't seen Tenet. I get the sense that Tenet would probably be the Nolan film I'm most likely to dislike.
Yeah, especially now.
I don't really have a good feeling about that one. Yeah, but no, and with the other things I've seen, even like Interstellar and Memento and Dunkirk, I've never, like, I don't remember at least ever being frustrated at not being able to hear something someone has said. So even though I do hear that complaint a lot, it's never been an issue for me, and certainly not with Oppenheimer.
Yeah, I did not have much of an issue with the sound in this. There's definitely moments where maybe you're like, oh, okay. Oh, he said that, and you kind of have a second to figure it out. But I've seen clips from Tenet, even though I haven't seen the full film, where there's warfare and a really loud Hans Zimmer score, and they're wearing these masks the whole time. And Christopher Nolan has said that he hates ADR, he hates dubbing. So
yes,
if he
king,
but there is a reason to dub sometimes, because sometimes there's just too much happening on set, and it's not possible to get audible dialogue, such as when there's warfare and everybody's speaking into masks like this, and you know there's going to be a Hans Zimmer score, and then all of your dialogue is just, you know, sometimes there's a reason to ADR it. But I did not have that issue with this, even though they did say they specifically used only on-set sound.
Yeah. Agree. Okay, we can go into final thoughts now. Oh yeah, Zach, you want to talk about Florence Pugh being naked? I forgot.
Oh, well, okay. What I will say is there was all the kids are terrified of sex scenes now. It's
those
it's
kids.
A problem. There's a deep moral thread of a fear of nudity and inappropriateness in film nowadays, specifically amongst our generation, and I would say the generation before us as well. Which we're all adults. Grow up. That's my opinion. But there was a scandal about the full frontal nudity in this film. The 15-minute full frontal nudity. And there's like 5 minutes of a topless Florence Pugh. There's like 10 seconds of simulated sex. And then there's a shot of Cillian Murphy in a chair with his legs crossed without a shirt. Ooh, scandalous. I'm coming down with a case of the vapors. And really, I think when it comes down to it, Florence Pugh, of her scenes, there's only like 2 where she is nude. And those 2 are sliced up, and we come back to them, but only like 2 of her scenes are actual nude scenes. And I just think that a lot of people made a big deal out of nothing. But it kind of in relation to that, this is a better segue than I thought it would be. So thank you for bringing this back up, Mitchell.
You're welcome.
I have occasionally regaled the podcast with stories of my time working in the cinema and the experiences that one sometimes has with elderly people when you work in a cinema. I no longer work in a cinema, but I did see Oppenheimer at 9 a.m. on a Saturday. So there were a lot of elderly people in my screening. And a few of these elderly people couldn't quite keep up, I guess, with the some of the more metaphorical things in the movie. So during the scene that I described earlier, where Oppenheimer is shown to be naked in the hearing, and then we see this image of Florence Pugh and Cillian Murphy having sex in the hearing as well, and it's meant to be this idea that he can't hide anything. During this devastating moment for Oppenheimer, there was an old man down the row from me who, kind of to himself, but also kind of loudly because he's old and can't hear how loud he is, said, "Are they just doing that in front of the scientists and everything?" And it kind of took the air out of the moment, but was very funny in hindsight.
5 out of 5. Yes. That's pretty awesome.
Gosh. Okay, final thoughts. I was fully prepared to give Hans his roses because I thought that Hans Zimmer scored this.
Ludwig,
but I was wrong.
Ludwig got your ass.
Ludwig, Mando boy, it's back. And he did it again, and it was epic. I really like the score to this. I don't think it's that distracting. I think it's used just the right amount. It doesn't feel constant to me. And in more dialogue-heavy scenes, it either takes a backseat or it isn't there at all, which I quite like. And I can't believe we haven't discussed our boy, Cookie Pocket alumnus Josh Hartnett at length, because I must take back everything bad I have ever said about this man on this podcast. Let it be stricken from the record. Delete Pearl Harbor from YouTube and Spotify right now, because I was wrong. This man is a star. And gosh, I semi-recently watched The Virgin Suicides, which is a very different movie and was made about 24 years before this. But he's also in that, and he's great in that too. And I just feel like I have thoroughly misjudged this guy. And so, Josh Hartnett, if you're listening, I'm very sorry. You are very talented. And thank you for sharing your gift with the world.
Hell yeah.
I mean it. I know I'm chuckling. It's because I'm guilty.
I will also say, man, we could just call out everybody. Rami Malek is in this for a bit, and he has a pretty great testimony.
Good in this.
Tom Conti is Einstein, pretty epic.
Yep.
Oh, yes.
It's Albert Einstein. Oh my god.
I do think,
and that's really hard.
Einstein
to play someone as iconic as that. You know.
I think Einstein has one of the most unintentionally funny moments in the film, though, where I think Oppenheimer and Kitty, they have some like guests. It's been a while since I saw the film, but they're leaving. They get in the taxi and they drive away, and Einstein is just standing behind the taxi. Yeah, and it's not established that they like live near each other or anything. So it's like, Albert, how far did you walk to get here in the middle of the night? Why are you in my yard?
Which is what happened, apparently.
Second time.
Really?
Yes. The one time I think when they figure out the chances are near zero, that was with Hans Bethe. That wasn't with Einstein. But every other interaction they had was basically word for word corroborated at some point. Macon Blair as Lloyd Garrison, as the lawyer, who is the great grandson of William Lloyd Garrison, actually, which is crazy, right? They never go. They never. There's a lot of multiple committees that investigate Oppenheimer. There's the House of Un-American, the Un-American Activities Board or something, which is one of the members is Richard Nixon. Funny enough, there's a lot of. I'm telling you, this is the AEC universe. This is. They didn't mention Eisenhower or show. Obviously the Truman scene. Oh my God, there's so many people that have praised Gary Oldman once again, because Gary Oldman can do no wrong at all.
Yeah.
There's multiple ways they could have gone. I already read in the book what had happened with Truman. There was like multiple reactions. There wasn't. Stimson was there, but they weren't like fully. That was the Secretary of War, but they weren't sure. Which thing he actually did, and I was like, man, all these sound awesome. There's like different reactions where he's like, well, you just suck then, or something, like something else he says, and like one of them was the handkerchief one. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe they did that. That was awesome.
The most despicable action, just wagging his hanky. Ugh.
Yeah.
But I should mention Macon Blair, Cookie Pocket alum, behind the camera, because he directed I Don't Feel at Home in This World Anymore.
No way.
That's so weird. I wonder why his name was so familiar.
What a wild connection.
Yeah. All the connections. Gosh. Dane DeHaan.
Also really good in this.
Nichols was a very important figure in real life when it came to this stuff. He literally was like integral in getting rid of the security clearance. I mean, I was surprised because he was playing like an officer who's generally supposed to be a lot older, and even though he appears younger, and he's like, he was kind of just like the security aide to Graves the whole time. I thought that he did an awesome job, like staying behind the scenes and everything. And you already mentioned Matt Damon, Zach, but I thought that he did a really great job. I think they casted him perfectly. I don't think he has a lot of range as an actor personally, and I think that for the role that he was playing, I think he did like an awesome job, like playing that gruff general that's just pissed off about everything, but still has a sense of morality and still has a sense of supporting Oppenheimer, which I thought was great. All the testimony parts are awesome. Pretty much. I'm gonna stop talking now. 5 out of 5. If you have 3 hours and you care at all about this, try it out. Even if you don't like know anything about it, I think if you've never seen a film like this before, this is a great start. And if you're a Nolan fan, I think once again it's a great foray into his work. And I think Zach, you share a sentiment. A lot of people I've read reviews for critics that have been in the business for a long time, or filmmakers, and they're saying like, oh yeah, Nolan, Goober, grayscale Nolan, and now it's like, oh wait, grayscale actually makes sense now. So so yeah, into our week in review.
Okay. Well, I've been watching and listening to a lot recently, but the thing I'm going to bring up, even though Mitchell talked about it, I think on Week in Review last season, or maybe 2 seasons ago, I want to talk about Hannibal, because I'm currently watching season 1 of Hannibal.
Wow.
It's been on my list forever, but I didn't get around to it when it was on Netflix, but it is on Tubi right now, so I've been watching it on there. And I just watched episode 8 this morning, as of recording this, and it's a solid show. I didn't realize before watching it that it went out on NBC, so like network television. I assumed it was on like FX or something like that, where they would get away with a little bit more. They do get away with a surprising amount for network TV in terms of gore and whatnot, because there are some pretty horrifically mutilated bodies on that show.
It gets worse. It gets worse, Zach.
But in terms of tone, it's still a little uneven for me, and I have heard it gets better. I've heard from some friends of mine, I mean, including you, Mitchell, but from other friends as well, that season 3 is where it gets like really great, specifically when they start to cover the Red Dragon stuff from Thomas Harris' first book. This first season feels very, a lot of it feels a very Criminal Minds to me. Yeah. So it's like fine, but it also feels very standard for this type of crime scene investigation show. Lawrence Fishburne is great, but he feels like he's making the most of crime scene investigation, whereas Mads Mikkelsen feels like he's in a totally different show as Hannibal Lecter. He really ups the ante when he's the focus, and you feel like you're watching something a lot classier than an NBC show. So episode 8, which I just watched, I think was maybe one of my favorite episodes so far, and I think it's because there's still stuff that like the rest of the crew are doing for that episode, but that episode mostly focuses on Hannibal and a dilemma that he has and something that he knows about and what's he going to do about it. And that's really compelling because I think Mads Mikkelsen is kind of just a better actor than a lot of the other people on the show. Although I will give credit to Scott Thompson, who plays Jimmy, the fingerprint analyst from the FBI team. Yeah. He was a member of Kids in the Hall in the 90s. And I had no idea he was on this show. So it was a nice surprise to see him in, I think, episode 2. And I probably would have started watching a lot earlier if I'd known that Buddy Cole cut up dead bodies on this show. So yeah, Hannibal, pretty solid so far. Maybe if we do another season, or by the time we do a season wrap-up for this season, I'll let you guys know what I think of the show as a whole, because maybe I'll finish it by then. We'll see.
You will hear the name Garrett Jacob Hobbs way too many times, Zach. You've only heard the beginning.
I've already heard Garrett Jacob Hobbs way too many times.
You've only heard the beginning. Okay.
Yeah, that is one of the things where I'm like, are we going to keep going on about this guy? Like, yes. He doesn't seem that special, but we'll see.
Yes. That big.
I have no idea what has happened. Well, you know me, I like to keep things current and outside of the Oppenheimer, Barbenheimer, Barbie, whatever it is, craze that's going on. I think the most recent film I saw in theaters, is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, which is a mouthful of a title and should probably not be the title. But this was kind of a strangely emotional landmark theater experience for me, just because it's the last thing I saw in the theater with my parents before moving to another state. So slightly a big deal, because seeing movies with my parents is a big thing for me and for them, I hope. And what I liked about this film more than anything else are the fact that the turtles are, for the first time, feel like teenagers, or even sometimes like more like preteens than adults, which is a welcome change. I don't recognize any of the names they got to play them, but they all just feel like your friend in middle or high school, you know, like they feel of this generation and they're likable. And I also like their turn on April O'Neil here. She's like, in a similar sense, an actual person. She's just like a teenage girl that like has teenage girl problems and looks like a person instead of Megan Fox, which is kind of refreshing, I think. And this had a lot to I had no expectations for this, but then like I sat down in the theater, there were a bunch of like little kids around us, and I was like, oh geez, this might not have been worth it. And then the trailers end, and then it's Seth Rogen for some reason giving the thank you for going to the movie speech, even though he plays Bebop and has like 2 lines in this. And I guess he wrote this. Did he write this? He produced it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. He was one of the 6 credited writers, Jesus, on this thing. But it's really just a good time. I would say narratively the story is not like groundbreaking in any sense, but it is a lot of fun. And Jackie Chan plays Splinter, and he's so good. Like so heart-wrenching. Like he gets his moments to shine. He's probably my favorite character in this, really, more than the turtles themselves. And I didn't really realize it during the film. Apparently, Giancarlo Esposito is in this too.
Oh.
And there's like a whole gang of other mutants, played by like Ice Cube and Paul Rudd and Hannibal Buress and Post Malone. So sure, they're a fun group. There was a lot of heart. The animation was cool. It was like sort of Spider-Verse-y in its texture, but it didn't feel like they were like abusing their animators to make it perfect. Like I kind of liked that it didn't look perfect, and I like this a lot more than Across the Spider-Verse for whatever reason. And to me, animation isn't about achieving a perfect image. It's about letting your artists make something that they themselves made, and the imperfections are to some extent like a stamp of that person having drawn it or computer animated it or whatever. And it's kind of like a gross movie for kids. There's like vomit, and the city looks disgusting, as it should, but it never does in superhero movies. This is the closest any of them get to making New York look gross as it is. Sorry, New York, but. Yeah, no, it was just really very solid. I don't know how much of it is the fact that I had little to no expectations, or if it was an emotional circumstance for me, but I landed on a very strong 4 out of 5. And if you like superhero movies, if you like kids movies, whatever, digestible stuff, it's a very fun 100 minutes. I would recommend it.
There was a very brief online fracas over people claiming that they made Splinter gay in this film. Is that actually in the film, or is that?
Did they?
I don't know. I didn't see it. That seemed like
the only way I can
aside from that being a non-issue. I was
it.
just curious as to whether that's actually in the movie.
Is it in the movie or not, Christian?
He talks about how hard it is to meet women. I really can't answer it without spoiling it.
Yeah, that sounds like that's not really. Yeah.
Something happens, but I can't say.
Something happens.
I can't really say.
Yeah, that's not a reason to not see the film, but I was curious as to whether that's even in the film, because it sounds like the kind of thing that somebody took one thing and blew it way out of proportion.
Yeah, it does sound like an internet thing.
Yes.
For sure.
Is this like Childish Gambino in the Solo movie all over again? Is Splinter like steroids? I don't know.
Oh, over Lando being pansexual? Yeah.
Well, I'll try to keep things fun by handing you both rifles because it's 1917. We're going to the Western Front.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
All Quiet on the Western Front. The number 3, 2022. The Netflix movie I finally really liked.
Way.
Yep, the color palette was appropriate. There is no 80s fun in this. There's a lot of death and destruction and gruesomeness. Even if it's not historically accurate. Still. And also not very accurate to the book. But still. It was a masterfully filmed movie. Like, literally, I read one of the top reviews. It was like, I've never seen a war movie this well like filmed and like memorably violent than Saving Private Ryan. I could probably agree with that. There's so many gruesome moments in here that are like so appropriate and like eye-opening, and if you didn't know anything about the Great War at all, and like this is a great like synopsis, a great preamble because it is a surface level anti-war movie, I will say, and like everything about it is anti-war, but it is never going to cover the nuance of the book and of, I believe, the 1930 film covers as well. I think there's a lot of nuance of the home front, a lot of psychological issues and very complex developments that go on in Paul Boehmer's mind and stuff, the way that it was written by Maria Remarque and everything. And I think that it's impossible. It's very hard, or basically impossible, to capture it in the same way that the 30s film did. And I think I will not hold that against the film because I still rated it a 4, just because first of all, a lot of these actors have not acted, and I think they did a fantastic, believable job, especially it's all in German, and it's a very believable circumstances they're in. A lot of the set design is awesome, considering I think it was only like a $30 million budget, which is fantastic considering all of the awesome shots of like nature and the changing of the war. Things are getting more advanced, and even though a lot of their tactics are very rudimentary and not accurate to real life, I still think a lot of there's flamethrowers, there's sharpened shovels, there's bayonet charges, there's everything is completely muddy and bloody the entire time. Like there's no sanitation. If you're a germaphobe, do not watch this film, because everybody's losing their legs, everybody's getting infected. It's pretty awesome. So it definitely captures that surface level anti-war feel, and I think a lot of the very short lead, like, calculated delivered lines and the camaraderie you instantly feel with all of these literal kids that are fighting this war and everything. And there's the necessary like big general in the fancy house, like yelling down at everyone, telling them they have to keep fighting even the armistice was already signed. I think the only actor I actually recognized in this at all was Daniel Bruhl, who's in it. He's actually at one of the armistice signing, and he's kind of instrumental and towards the end of the film with how the war ends and everything, and I thought he did a pretty great job. But yeah, I recommend the film, definitely. I think if anyone who's a fanatic of the book will probably not like the film. I really like the book a lot, and I understand like what the film was going for, but I feel like a lot of people that are like big fanatics of the book would have a huge problem that a lot of the nuance is completely lost in all of this action and violence and gruesomeness. So I chalked it up more of an artistic preference than something that was like, oh, we need to capture every aspect of the book and make it like, a psychological drama and show more of the home front. I didn't think that's what the film was going for. So I really enjoyed it. I thought it was awesome. I definitely recommend it as like, especially seeing it in 4K. Man, those nature shots of the fog and the winter and the massive battlefields with all the extras and everything. Probably partial inspiration from 1917, but I didn't get a similar feel from 1917 at all. Also, just coming from the German perspective, too, there's a lot to be gained with that. So, yeah, I definitely recommend it. Yeah, what's the... Are we going to...
I guess we run down because I don't have a tour anymore.
Yeah.
I still have to see the original All Quiet on the Western Front, though. I've seen the one shot that everybody's seen where the one soldier is climbing up the barbed wire and then there's an explosion, and when the smoke clears, it's just his hands. Yeah. And that remains like one of the most shocking things I've seen in a film, despite the fact that movie is almost 100 years, 100 years old. So I really need to get into gear and watch that full movie.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess we'll run down. Christian, better start running because the FBI is coming after you to revoke your clearance.
Yeah.
It's coming.
We've learned we've got to be a lot further away for the test. I'm running.
Iron Man's coming for you. He's mad about your statements.
Can't work under these conditions. I quit.
Yeah. So 1 minute, Christian gets destroyed. He gets blown up and obliterated. Incinerated, develops cancer, all those things. So
this is a lot crueler than we've been to him before.
Yes, very explosive. Okay, Zach, you can go first and start the time.
Alrighty, we will begin then in 3, 2, 1, start. Full frontal nudity.
3 out of 5.
Poison apple.
2 out of 5.
Chances being near 0.
3 out of 5.
That's Malky and PTSD.
4 out of 5.
Tatlock murder.
3 out of 5.
Tatlock suicide.
2 out of 5.
Feynman on the bongos.
4 out of 5.
Theory only getting you so far.
5 out of 5.
Least helpful Senate aide.
4 out of 5.
Crybabies.
3 out of 5.
Roderick still rules.
2 out of 5.
Martinis.
3 out of 5.
No CGI.
4 out of 5.
Duck pond morality.
4 out of 5.
Passing off parental duties.
3 out of 5.
A bigger bum.
4 out of 5.
Josh Revenge Against Megan. Oh,
3 out
stop.
of 5.
Wow. Wow, we
Dang
got
it,
some
I
good
think
ones
we
left
had
over.
a connection slow
Yeah.
down. Yeah. Bummer.
It's all right. We're nearing the finale, so you know those are going to be
are.
in there. They're good ones, too.
Wow.
Okay. So what are we previewing next?
That'll be me.
Hey!
Yes. So we've already
Zach,
recorded this
cook on a
episode.
pizza.
This will not be an Italian film. We've already discussed this one, actually. We've already recorded this episode. But next time, we are going to be watching a Swedish film, an Ingmar Bergman film.
Wow.
And despite liking Bergman, I don't think I've actually brought him to the podcast before. So this will be interesting because we are going to be discussing Hour of the Wolf. It's the only horror film that Bergman ever made. It was the second Bergman that I ever saw, and we'll be joined by a guest as well. So fun and laughs and existential dread all around next time when we discuss Hour of the Wolf.
Yay. I'll try not to watch it on the
Correction,
beach.
Zach, cook a da meatball.
Zach cooking the meatball, Hour of the Wolf. IKEA.
In the bushy. In the bushy. It is the hour of the wolf.
With that being said, have a bombastic rest of your day. We will see you on that hour. Goodbye.